welcome in to this week's edition of The Locker Room. I'm your host, Cade Crenshaw, joined this week by Will Kronsberg. Will, thanks for joining us this week. Tell us a little bit about you and where you're from.
So I am a freshman. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. I've been really into sports my whole life, so brought me here.
Well, we're glad to have you this week, and this week's an interesting topic because obviously the last few weeks we've been talking about the NFL as the season is heading into week 3 now, and we've seen a myriad of injuries across the league, including some of the league's top stars, and I think the biggest name you have to start with is from this past weekend in Giants running back Saquon Barkley, out for the year with a torn ACL. How do you expect the Giants and a brand new head coach in Joe Judge to respond by losing arguably their best player?
I think it's going to be tough for the Giants ultimately. There were a lot of questions going into the season about Joe Judge, having never been a coordinator on offense or defense at the NFL level. And they have a tough challenge coming up. They have the 49ers coming in this weekend. Not a lot of experience behind Saquon Barkley. I think they just signed Devontae Freeman, formerly of the Falcons.
Yeah, you have Devontae Freeman coming in as well as Wayne Gallman and a few other pieces. Also, Dion Lewis is there in the mix as well. It's a host of characters that maybe can piece something together for this Giants squad, but what it's really going to come down to is how effective can Daniel Jones be, also in really upgrading that passing game. That's what the Giants are going to be depending on now.
Absolutely. I think Daniel Jones really has to step up in his second year. He lost a receiving target over the weekend as well. So it's really a big question of where will the Giants go without Saquon Barkley and with questions surrounding Daniel Jones.
Not only do we see Saquon Barkley go down, but also arguably the league's second top best running back in Christian McCaffrey. He's going to be out multiple weeks with an ankle injury for the Carolina Panthers. And it's a similar situation. They have Mike Davis as the backup, a former Gamecock. But really, where can the Panthers go now? They have a brand new head coach in Matt Rule without their star player.
I think a lot of the same questions come with the Panthers. Christian McCaffrey is undoubtedly one of the best players in the league. Not only does he contribute in the running game, but he contributes so much in the passing game. You saw just after his injury, Mike Davis, who's known for, he came in as an injury replacement for Marcus Lattimore years ago, right here in Columbia, but he had to catch a lot of passes. He ended up with 8 receptions, which is very promising, but there's no way you can replace the whole of Christian McCaffrey with just 1 or 2 guys.
I think the big thing that separates McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley is, and we set them in that 1A, 1B running back category across the entire league, is not because of the teams that they're on, but just the talent themselves. I think we're going to see a big drop-off in Carolina, New York as a whole now that they've lost those 2 huge talent voids.
Absolutely. Neither team has a clear new direction for their offense. Both teams have relatively inexperienced quarterbacks. Teddy Bridgewater still coming back from that injury a few years back. And obviously Daniel Jones just in his second year as the starter.
And we talk about the Giants and their upcoming opponent in the San Francisco 49ers. They've had their share of injuries as well that's really crushing them on both sides of the ball. First, you look at the defensive playmaker, Nick Bosa. He's going to be out for the year with a torn ACL. You come over to the offensive side of the football, and nobody's been ruled out for the year, but there's plenty of question marks surrounding the injury column. First, you start out with George Kittle. Obviously, he's been out with a knee injury, sat out of last week's game, and sat out of the second half of week 1. Maybe he can come back this week. Not only that, we saw the quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo, go down with an ankle. Kyle Shanahan has said we can possibly see him suit up this weekend, but it is still a game-time decision. And then you look at the running back core. Raheem Mostert and Tevin Coleman both dealing with ankle and knee injuries that have left them doubtful for this upcoming Sunday's game. Not to mention that, but all of the San Francisco 49er players are skeptical of playing against the Giants because of the turf inside of MetLife Stadium says it's sticky, hard to run on, can potentially cause more injuries. Could we see the 49ers sit their biggest stars in hopes of saving them from future injury because of the turf at MetLife Stadium?
I think it's absolutely a question we have to consider. With the 49ers playing back-to-back weeks at MetLife Stadium, we know that the turf changes so much because they have to switch between the Jets and the Giants. Jimmy Garoppolo going down. Nick Mullins hasn't seen any significant action in about 2 years. They still have Deebo Samuel out for a couple weeks with his injuries, and they lost 2 of their top pass rushers in Nick Bosa and Solomon Thomas on back-to-back plays with ACL injuries. But at the same time, it's the Giants, and that is, I think, a W that the 49ers were sort of counting on going into the season, just like how they overcame the Jets pretty easily, even with all of their injuries this week.
Let's go over to the AFC now and talk about the Denver Broncos, where they've lost two of their biggest names, one on offense, one on defense, heading into the season. It hasn't been a very kind season to the Broncos. First, I think the biggest playmaker is going to be Von Miller. The Broncos lost him back in training camp to a knee injury. He's done for the season. And then just last week, we saw Drew Lock go down with a shoulder injury. He's out from 2 to 6 weeks. And in response to that injury, we saw John Elway and the Broncos sign Blake Bortles. Can Blake Bortles do something in Denver in the absence of Drew Lock?
Well, I think the first question is how quickly can Blake Bortles learn that offense? He's coming in, he has experience with the Jaguars, a little bit of time as the backup with the Rams, but the Broncos currently are rolling with Jeff Driscoll, who we saw at Florida a little bit, and then Louisiana Tech. Not really a lot of NFL action to his name, and not a clear direction for that offense to go either.
You know, another team I'm interested to watch and how they respond, and really had some good luck in the draft, that's going to be the Indianapolis Colts. Obviously, you bring in Phillip Rivers. Now, he was really going to depend on Marlon Mack as that replacement for a Melvin Gordon or an Oster Eckler role that he had out with the Chargers. Now we see Marlon Mack, he's done for the year with ACL. They're going to depend heavily on the rookie running back and Jonathan Taylor.
I think Jonathan Taylor, if you're looking at rookie running backs, Jonathan Taylor is a strong way to go. Solid Big Ten experience in college, and an experienced quarterback in Phillip Rivers to kind of guide him along the way. One of the other benefits the Colts have is that they do have Jacoby Brissett as their backup quarterback, and he's a strong backup given his experience as a starter, both with New England and Indianapolis.
Now, the rest of these injuries that we're discussing aren't season-ending, but they are minor, and they're possibly holding guys out for a few weeks. You look at Devontae Adams, Michael Thomas, A.J. Brown, Kenny Galladay, DJ Chark, the list goes on and on, of some of the league's most premier players, especially on the offensive side of the football, being down with injuries. Obviously, there's a lot you can put the blame on a lot of areas right now. You could say it's been the shortened training camp, the different restrictions they have and things like that. The blame can be put in a lot of different places, but the simple fact remains, guys are getting hurt and players just can't stay healthy in this 2020 season.
Absolutely. I think you look at the training camp, the shortened training camp, and you have two separate issues. So your top guys weren't able to prepare as much as they would have in a non-COVID season, but you also didn't get that solid pregame or preseason experience for your normal second, third, and fourth string guys on the practice squad, options that you would go to when you had a devastating injury like we've seen in the past 2 weeks.
It's going to be an interesting season, especially with all these injuries and how teams are responding. Looking at this full list of injuries that we've discussed, what team do you think is put most behind the eight ball? What team is hindered most by an injury?
I think the true team that has been hurt most by the injury, we can talk about the Giants. I think the Panthers had a sort of window looking at the NFC South. We know that they have Brady and Breeze in there, but Teddy Bridgewater showed a lot, 6-0 as a backup with the Saints last year. I think that the Panthers are sort of stuck in neutral right now. You could say the same thing about the Broncos, who were sort of vying for that second place spot in the AFC West behind the Chiefs.
It's definitely a lot of question marks surrounding injuries for this upcoming season. One final team we have to talk about, though, is those Dallas Cowboys, right? You look back in Week 1, they lost Blake Jarwin, the tight end. That's a pass-catching option down for Dak Prescott. Then on the defensive side of the football, they lost Leighton Vander Esch, an all-pro linebacker, to a collarbone injury. He's on the IR. Maybe he can come back towards the end of the season. But we did see those Cowboys get the win, come from behind against Atlanta over the weekend with a game-winning field goal. Not only that, but Dak Prescott throwing for over 400 yards through the air. Can the Cowboys be able to respond both offensively and defensively with the pieces they've lost?
I think the Cowboys offense looks very strong right now. Dak Prescott is showing why he deserves that extension rather than just going franchise tag to franchise tag. They have solid pieces on the outside with Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup. But their win against the Falcons wasn't exactly confidence-inspiring. They won by 1 point, late onside kick where the Falcons sort of backed off. Sort of questionable how much did the Cowboys actually show last week.
It's going to be an exciting season, especially how these teams are continuing to battle and what's been some interesting games so far, but also how they respond to losing so many key players to the injury bug. Well, folks, that wraps up this week's edition of The Locker Room. Will, thank you for joining us this week, and I hope you join us next week for another great week of conversation. For Will Kronsberg, I'm Cade Crenshaw. You've been watching The Locker Room, and we'll see you next week.